And pleasant good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing okay. And welcome to Talk Show Presents. So as you know, the midterm elections is coming up pretty soon. We roughly have about 30 days or so before the midterm elections started, and we are continuing our coverage of the midterm elections that's coming up on November the 8th. And so with us today is Dr. David Schein. Good afternoon. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon. Delightful to be with you. And we have a beautiful day here in Houston, Texas. First day in about 9 or 10 months that we've had a morning below 60 degrees. So it's cool and pleasant here and sunny.
Oh, wonderful. Fantastic. So I understand that you wrote a book. It's called Bad Deal for America.
That's
And
correct.
deals with so it's kind of like for you before we get into this actual book, could you let the audience know who you are?
Sure. I am a professor at the University of St. Thomas here in Houston. It's a medium-sized Catholic university. I teach business law, management, and I'm also director of graduate programs. So I help people get their master's in business administration. I have been involved in business nationwide. I work for a couple major corporations like Shell Oil in my early career, and have also been what some might call a political junkie. I actually did run for office twice in the early 90s here in the greater Houston area. I have pretty good geographic coverage. I've lived in Massachusetts, Pennsylvania twice, Virginia 4 times. I've lived in California. I've lived in Texas several times. I've lived in Louisiana. And as part of my travels and business, I've been in about half of the states in the United States. So I have a pretty good perspective. And my interest in politics is more from a business and management standpoint, because I think government is supposed to be serving us. And it seems like that's been a little turned around as we have people who go to Washington and make a lifetime out of it and seem to be pretty disconnected from you and me. And so my books are written, I have 2 books out, are written from a perspective of what did people do for us while they were in Washington? So my first book was called Decline of America, 100 Years of Leadership Failures. And that looked at the presidencies of Wilson through Obama. Bad Deal of America only looks at members of Congress. So they had to serve in the Congress or the Senate. Someone asked me recently why Trump wasn't in the book, and the answer is because Trump simply became president. He was never in the US Congress or Senate. The book is written it has a specific point, that point being, what are we going to do about having a better Congress that represents all of us and not just some special interest groups?
Okay, so here's how it's going to work. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming election, jury election on November the 8th. We kind of want your perspective on that. Then we're going to get into the 2 books
Sure.
that you have written. And then finally, we will talk about, understand that you have 2 podcasts that you host.
Yes.
As well. So we're going to talk about that in that order. Now, we know that we have an election that's coming up on November the 8th. And I understand that, when you're reading these 2 books, you're looking at more the economics side of it. Can you give us an idea of outlook of what to expect for the oncoming election?
Well, first of all, it's an extremely important election. The United States has been, in my opinion, struggling I think we came through COVID sort of okay, but the United States seems very unsettled at this time, and people have a lot of concerns. Crime and the inflation, our education system, our healthcare system. I mean, people have major life concerns. And so it's an extremely important election. I don't think anybody would argue that point. In terms of what has complicated it is the Supreme Court ruling in the Dobbs case on abortion. Abortion was largely a sort of settled issue, and it varied from state to state, but it still kind of came under certain guidelines. And the Dobbs decision has complicated. In other words, if I was sitting here in April before the Dobbs decision was formally announced, I could easily have said this is going to be not a Republican sweep, but a Republican tsunami, that it's going to be the largest number of House seats ever to change that, as far as I know. At the moment, because abortion is an important issue to a certain percentage of the population, it could affect things, but I think crime and inflation are going to outweigh abortion, but it could reduce the overall impact of the election. And I'll use a very simple one-on-one example. I was talking to a lady last night. She's a senior. She's over 65. She said, I normally vote Democratic, and I am unhappy about the Texas state law on abortion, which is a very strict law. And she said, but I am going to vote Republican in the Harris County race. Harris County is the county that surrounds Houston. It's an extremely important county, not just in Texas, but in the whole United States. And it presently has a Democratic leader, and there is a very strong Hispanic Republican candidate running against the Hispanic Democrat incumbent, both Hispanic females. So it's going to be a very interesting race from a diversity standpoint, meaning that the two candidates meet the same, if you will, diversity standards. But it's also largely a result of a battle in terms of soft on crime perception versus tough on crime, according to the Republican candidate. So I'm not sure what exactly is going to turn out, but I do think that it's a complex election, and I think we're going to need to look state by state. You can look at Fetterman versus Oz in Pennsylvania. Both of them have some drawbacks. Obviously, Fetterman is very far left and is viewed as pro-crime and has had a stroke. So he has quite a list on Fetterman's side. Mehmet Oz, of course, is a TV personality, but he largely lives in New Jersey and California. And so he has the problem of people saying he's not local to the state of Pennsylvania. So in your nearby state, I know you're in Alabama and you're in the state of Georgia, they've got a pro football star, an African-American pro football star, against a African-American preacher who's presently in the Senate. And that's going to be a fascinating race. So I've just mentioned two races where it's difficult to say what's going to happen in those two, but they're pretty interesting. And like I said, in the down ballot races, I could see a lot of people showing up and doing as this lady said last night, and voting to have a safer environment. And I don't know what the crime situation is where you are, but the crime situation here in the greater Houston area, which again includes Harris County, is quite severe. I mean, you leave something in your car for a few minutes it's quite possible you'll come out with at least a broken window, and contents of your car missing. It's become harder to steal cars, so the car theft itself is actually not as much of an issue, but car break-ins is at an all-time high. Violence is at an all-time high, and so we're really challenged. So my guess is that it will not be as much of a Republican sweep as was predicted earlier this year because of the Dodd's decision. But I think it will be a Republican clear shift in the House. I don't see how they keep the House. In the Senate, my gut feeling tells me that it will go Republican, but it won't. It'll be 1 or 2 votes. It's not going to be, a gigantic switch in the Senate.
I understand that there's some key governor races too across the country. You got Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Of course, in Arizona and Florida, there's a bit of a controversy going around, but those 2 governors had, actually sent refugees to another state.
Well, obviously, being in a state, Texas, where we have shipped, I think, a record number of migrants up north under Texas Governor Abbott. I think I can speak to that issue from Texas as well as Arizona and Florida. First of all, I don't see Chris displacing DeSantis in the election in Florida. DeSantis, first of all, has been riding a high. He's very popular nationally and not just in Florida. And Chris, who of course used to be a Republican, is running as a Democratic opponent. I don't think has mounted that serious a challenge. So people who are historically Democrats may vote for him out of habit, but I think DeSantis is in a pretty solid position. In Arizona, I have not been tracking that race as closely, but obviously illegal immigration is a huge issue. Texas seems to get most of the publicity, but you have borders in New Mexico and Arizona, and it's a very serious problem. The people that live along the borders have experienced murders, they've experienced vandalism, they've experienced just awful situations. And so I think that could have a big impact in terms of moving a state with a Democratic governor toward a Republican governor, depending on the overall circumstances. In terms of shipping migrants up to northern locations, one thing I did want to point out is, of course, El Paso is on the far side of Texas, and the Democratic mayor of El Paso has begun to bus migrants up north. So it's not just a Republican, and some people have called it a publicity stunt, and some others have foolishly said it's illegal. As long as you're not holding a gun to their head, making them get on the bus, it seems like it's not illegal. And as you know, there's been some legal challenges to that. But I think something that people have overlooked, which I think is very interesting, is that Biden himself and the immigration department, the INS, they have been shipping people all over the country already. So that kind of got lost in the shuffle in the way the headlines are being handled. But if it's okay for Biden to throw people on a bus and ship them around the United States or on a plane in the middle of the night, I'm not sure why it would be illegal for DeSantis to send a plane to Martha's Vineyard, or for Governor Abbott or some of the other governors to ship people to Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C. Now, I'm not endorsing any of this. I'm just saying that, speaking as a member of the community, that largely a lot of people have expressed support for this. And I have another friend, a lady who, again, is over 65, who is a lifelong Democrat. She's from New York City. She is here in Houston. And she strongly supports Abbott sending people up north, and said, why should we here in Texas be punished because we're on the border? And, we didn't ask to have these people come to see us. Why would it be okay for people to invade our premises or our state and not share the blame with other states? So I don't think that person will vote Republican, but it's interesting that the person expressed support for what's happening. And in fact, I know a little bit more about that person, that she very much dislikes Governor Abbott, but she likes what he's doing with the immigrant situation. So again, some of this may not change the outcome of the election, but in terms of popularity, shipping people out, making an issue out of it, I think has helped cement Abbott's position here in Texas. The Texas election is one, the latest I heard is that Abbott has an 8% lead, or an 8-point lead over Beto O'Rourke. And so I don't see that lead evaporating. I did not see the debate that they had the other night, but from what I've heard about the debate, I don't think it'll change anybody's opinion. That's the only debate scheduled between those two candidates.
Well, so what about the states that in which they have received immigrant population? I wonder how how they feel, like in Massachusetts, for example.
Well, I think it's a great question. Part of it is that the recipient locations are Democrat strongholds. So, I mean, that's why they've been targeted by the governors, the Southern governors. So I don't know that it would have a big impact in those states, because I think those states were already leaning in the Democrat direction. But it's a hard call. In other words, I don't think that the Republican governors sending people to Democrat strongholds in the North endeared themselves, or maybe probably even hurt their Republican colleagues in those states. But I don't think it would make a big difference in the overall outcome of the elections the big elections coming up.
What per se, in your opinion, are going to be the main issues in this election?
Like I mentioned earlier, I think that it's a toss-up between inflation and crime. And those to me are the two big overwhelming issues. And if you do not feel safe, then I think that you're going to lean towards more conservative candidates, who are not always, by the way, the Republican candidate, but maybe an independent candidate, maybe a conservative Democrat, which you do run into here in Texas occasionally. And so I think that's going to be a toss-up between the two. Inflation is very bad. Here in Houston, the consumer inflation rate is estimated at 13%, higher than this 8.3% artificial number the feds are telling us for a nationwide average. And so people are struggling. Raises were initially helping, and people were like excited, say in early 2021, people were like, gee, we're getting raises, life is getting better, all that. Boy, then when inflation kicked in, people continued to get raises, but the raises were not as large as the rate of inflation. And so gas prices did go down over the summer, which is a good thing, but there's a real concern that there's going to be a massive impact when people start turning their heaters on, and we're shipping emergency energy, primarily liquefied natural gas, across to Europe. And that's going to keep raising the prices. So I'm estimating that here in Houston, we use a lot of natural gas for heating, that we're going to pay double what we paid last winter. Now, the good news is here in Houston, Texas, We are rarely below freezing, and we don't have huge heating bills, but they're going to be perceptibly higher. I just got a notice from my electric company that there's a new additional cost for electricity here in Texas, and that they're going to be passing it along to me per my contract with them. I have a 3-year electricity agreement, but apparently there's some loopholes in there that allow them to raise it if the certain costs come in. So I think that'll be a big deal. In terms of immigration, I think it's going to largely be the border states, as we say, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. I would say California, but California doesn't seem to care whether they have a lot of illegal immigration. California also has a relatively small border. So while they do have a border with Mexico, that it's not the situation that you have. And the reason you hear so much about Texas is because we have an enormous border with Mexico. And so there's a lot more exposure. There are a lot more areas that cannot be controlled. So I don't think I would put that 3 or 4 on the list. And like I said, the wild card in this election is the abortion issue, is the Dobbs ruling. And I think that Texas, in my opinion, shot itself in the foot if it wanted to help Republican candidates by passing a very extreme abortion bill that I don't think will be the abortion bill for Texas over the long term. I'm morally opposed to abortion, but like a lot of people who are, in my opinion, reasonable, I think you have to have exceptions for the life of the mother. The health of the mother to me, is paramount, and I'm a parent and a grandparent. To have certain reasonable opportunities. I have some personal experience with this. I went to college in Philadelphia many years ago, and in the state of Pennsylvania, abortion was not legal, and it was legal in New York. So the college students who would get pregnant in Pennsylvania would take the train to New York to get an abortion, and sometimes they were getting it's a horrible term, but the term back then was called a coat hanger abortion, that they were getting abortions in unauthorized clinics and things like that. So because I am familiar with the very bad side to situations, I favor again, not routine use of abortion as a method of birth control, but to make abortion reasonably available so that we do not force women into unhealthy, unsafe conditions. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some compromise, but in the meantime, like I said, the current Texas law does not help Texas politicians. But again, Governor Abbott, he has such a big lead over Robert Beto O'Rourke that I don't see that being being the ultimate deciding factor. Might change a few votes.
I also want to mention to our viewers and listeners that of course, in the state of Alabama, one of the things that is talked about is the 2021 congressional lines. Here in Alabama, we had 4 individuals, 4 voters that sued the state of Alabama, stating that when the lines were drawn, the congressional lines were drawn, that it violated the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And that case has actually made it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will be hearing that case on October the 4th. That's this coming Tuesday.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, the Ulster-led broadcast section will be have coverage of that court case. Starting on Monday, we will have a preview of how that case ended up in the Supreme Court. There's also a similar case in North Carolina where the state legislators want to have complete control over election operations. And that case is on its way to the Supreme Court as well. And so from October 3rd to the 5th, we will be talking about that in detail, as well as kind of get in some coverage of those actual cases. So please stay tuned for that. That's kind of like a big issue in the state of Alabama.
Absolutely, because you've got early voting coming up. And the question is, if the Supreme Court disallows the changed lines, who will vote where and for which candidates is a big deal. And I don't know that you could even fix it in time to meet the November 8th election. So it's really something. I can tell you that I'm a huge supporter of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and my concern is I would like to see us have a much more rational division. Again, I approach things from a management standpoint, from an organizational standpoint. And when I ran for election,
I don't know, we seem to have a little difficulty here.
we just lost a little bit. I'll answer the question again.
Okay.
Okay, something's happening on my end, but I think I'll be okay for a second here. So not sure. I'm not sure what happened. I'm not getting any message on my side that it's out. There it goes. So I think we're okay again. In terms of redistricting, this is a very complicated issue. When I ran for office in the early 1990s, I ran for state rep here in the Houston area. It was this strange. One side of the street was in my district and the other side of the street was not in my district. Now, I don't know how that solves any type of having a state representative represent the people in a community. It seems to me that we should focus on communities and having reasonable lines drawn over long periods of time, reflecting only population growth. And to me, it's a great shame that these lines are being used to either create certain types of districts or to create other types of districts, rather than saying, you know what, here's the community, let's draw a box around it and let's draw another box contiguous to it and so forth, so that each representative represents fairly a particular community. And I'll give you a specific example that's kind of interesting to me. In the again in the early 1990s, the Texas legislature specifically created a district to be either a predominantly African American district or to be a predominantly Hispanic district. A white, well-established Democrat won that seat and held that seat for many years in Congress. And so the point was, if the gerrymandering, as it's famously called from the history books, was designed to create an opportunity for a minority member to be in U.S. Congress, it utterly failed at that purpose, because the stronger play was the guy was a big-time Democrat who was well known as a state rep, pulled the seat. And so we didn't really get what we wanted to get if the plan was to have a minority person go to Congress from that area. But it also points out kind of the shortcoming of the whole plan, which is, why don't we just focus on communities and try and make sure that we have people who are really good. Plus, as I argue in my book, Bad Deal for America, we have far, far too many lifetime politicians in Washington. One of the reasons it's such a big deal is because that person goes to Washington, they're just gone, and power of the incumbency is incredible. So if we could get term limits, the redistricting issue would become less important, because every few years you would get to elect a brand new representative. So if you had a person X in there, whatever their description, whatever their gender or preference or racial affiliation or whatever, they're not going to be there forever. You're going to have another opportunity, and maybe next time it'll be, if it was a man, now it's a woman, or so forth. So I think there's some opportunities that we have to make some changes.
Do you think that we should separate the issue from the party?
I would love to see that. Yes, the simple answer is yes. What difference does it make? It should be, like I said, tied to a community of areas. In Houston, the old system were called wards, and people still use that terminology here: fifth ward, third world ward. A lot of that has changed, but sometimes people still do use those designations. But there are distinct neighborhoods in just about every city in America, and it makes sense to not split neighborhoods. And one of the things that we sadly see is the creation of voting districts, both for state level and federal level, that divide neighborhoods. And that to me doesn't make any sense. And again, it creates these circumstances where we end up in court arguing about, did we, create a district that unfairly increases the number of potentially white members of Congress, or one minority over another minority. And I think we should move away from that focus, but try and make it be a community of interest.
We're going to move on. Very good, insightful information about the upcoming elections. And next, we're going to talk about your two books, Bad Deal for America and The Decline of America. Tell us a little bit about those books.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, because you read the titles right together, is I am an optimist. I am a college professor. I believe that my students are going to go out and make a difference in the world. And if I felt like the world was doomed and things were going to be horrible, I don't know what I'd do, but I probably wouldn't be teaching at the college level. So both books are optimistic to this extent. We have not done a good job of running America. And we means everybody. It doesn't mean this group, that group, whatever group. It doesn't make much difference. The Democrats have been in power, the Republicans have been in power, this group, that group. We did some phenomenal things in America. We came in, World War I rather was, we talk about decline of America, we start with President Wilson. And we sat on the sidelines and watched Europe tear itself apart largely. And then we jumped in, and within a couple months, the war changed completely. And within 6 to 8 months, the United States had come in and basically won World War I and became established as the world power. Unfortunately, America then went through the Great Depression, kind of sat on its hands, and allowed World War II to begin, and then came in late, and again, amazingly, created such incredible production of planes and tanks and brave people who went and fought in other countries to save the rest of the world, that we did just amazing things. And then we kind of stuttered along the way. The Korean War was a mess. Vietnam was a mess. But in the midst of Vietnam, we landed a man on the moon. And the scientific value of what we did, a lot of the technological advancement that we have today is a result of America committing itself to education after World War II and committing itself to technology. And the United States has done a tremendous amount of good in the world. We have given money and provided aid to many countries around the world and many peoples. But at the same time, Washington is in shambles in the White House, and it's in shambles in the Congress. And so Decline of America is about a failure of leadership in the greatest country on earth, and a country that has tremendous universities and tremendous industries, and we have great leaders all over the place. It just seems we don't seem to be able to put them in the White House. Parallel to that, Bad Deal for America, by the way, is based on a deck of cards. So deal is like in dealing a deck of cards. And again, it's a bipartisan book. 26 Republicans, 26 Democrats are identified. You know, there is a joker in the deck, but that's separate. And these people were singled out because they have singularly said utterly stupid things. And we want people to appreciate the fact you're electing these people. Wake up a little bit, pay attention to when you go to the vote, and vote in the primaries. Let's get some better candidates in the general election. So that's kind of the general push behind it. So a Bad Deal for America specifically promotes term limits. Decline of America, I have a more complex agenda. I talk about the United States taking a better look at the presidency. One of my suggestions is probably more radical, is that we divide the United States leadership into a prime minister and a president. The president would be the domestic president, and the prime minister would be responsible for foreign affairs. I think that the job has become too big for any one person. And I specifically didn't say one man, even though we've not had a female president, but I am very optimistic that we will have a female president in the near future. So just a little pitch for that.
You kind of, hit something, on the nail when you talk about, we need to be really particular about who we put into office. I can write a book on that myself. I'm just absolutely flabbergasted. And I ask this all the time. Why do we continue to put people in office and we know that they're not doing anything and they're not serving your best interests? And that can be from that can go all the way down to the local level, like your mayor and your city council. I'm like, I don't understand it. But yet politicians can be so manipulative. They're so manipulative that it almost becomes like an art.
Yes.
A science. And people get angry with me because on social media I use the hashtag elections have consequences.
That's a wonderful phrase. I agree with you.
In 2021, I ran for city council here in Alabama, and a lot of the people that I know that are grassroots progressive candidates, we ran on progressive platforms. There was nothing partisan about the issues that we talked about was on a nonpartisan basis. It was like, say, hey, X, Y, and Z is going to happen, and the people didn't listen. It was a very low turnout. I think it was like maybe about 20% of the registered voters that actually voted in that municipal election. And now we're beginning to see what I've been talking about, and I've been warning people about, and other people have been warning people about. It has manifested itself, and now people looking at me was like, I'm like, what do you want me to do? I mean, we warned y'all that this was going to happen, but y'all let these folks, trick y'all and into voting for them again, with these sad stories about, I'm gonna do things better, I'm gonna do things a little different. No, that's a bunch of BS. That's my experience.
Yes.
And
Well,
so
I
people get mad at
agree.
me when I say election have consequences because it does. I mean, it's truth. And I'm saying, where's the lie in that? And now they want to hold me accountable as if I actually sit in the seat. I was like, that is wrong. I
I
said,
agree with you.
you need to be talking to the people that y'all have chosen, to elect it. You mean to tell me that you're gonna elect someone, just because, they gave you a hot lunch, or, tickets to a football game. Come on. I mean, stuff like that, or, we belong to the same fraternity or sorority. We went to the same university. All of that is just superficial garbage.
Yes.
But that's the criteria that we use, to elect people. Is no longer, about who is capable of addressing, the issues. It has become a lot of buddy politics, and it's on a federal level, as well. We don't hear about it on the federal level as much as we do on the state and local level, but it does exist. And so
Absolutely.
I challenge everyone that from this election on, that you really need to examine the candidates, put aside all that, superficial stuff. I remember one time that 2 years ago, during the presidential election, of course, there was some local races, as well. And one of the persons that was running, well, he actually went to that same high school, that I went to. And so people automatically assume that, since we go to the same high school, that I should, support, my classmate. I was like, nah, I don't work like that. So
Yeah.
I am not your average garden variety, voter. And a lot of times it's in local politics, a lot of local politicians don't even want to be on this podcast because they know that I'm going to ask the tough questions. I'm going to hold these individuals, accountable, and I'm going to, bring in the tough issues, the kitchen table issues that people are talking about that should make elections worthwhile. That's why I didn't want to be on it, but that's fine. That's fine. It shows that you're really not for the people's best interest. You're in there for yourself. And
And
until we address
absolutely.
that, we're never going to have the opportunity to have people in office. That's from the local level to the federal level who actually give a damn about people.
Right. And I think you've got great examples right now with people, and I'll be bipartisan. Mitch McConnell uh, and Joe Biden have both been in Washington far, far too long. And I think both of them are very, very disconnected from the American people. Nancy Pelosi is going to be 83. And I don't think she'll be Speaker of the House, and I think she'll be reelected, despite the fact that most people know she won't be Speaker of the House, and she's probably going to resign. And she's already indicated privately that she's probably going to resign if and when the Congress changes party, she will lose the seat as Speaker, and that she'll probably resign, which means people are voting for basically a deliberate lame duck in her district in California to put her in office just so that she can resign and they appoint somebody else to the seat who's not going to be the choice of the people. And it's not fair. McConnell's been there far too long, not a person of accomplishment, but I understand that he's worth some millions of dollars. And I'm trying to figure out, I mean, I think you and I need to work on this program. How do you do almost nothing in your whole life, and yet you're worth millions and millions of dollars? I'd like to get on the gravy train myself, but I mean,
I know, right?
and by the way, there's a controversy within the Democrat Party because a top Democrat blocked the finance bill, the bill that says that the members of Congress can't invest in stocks and stuff like that. And some of the younger Democrats in office got pretty upset about that and said, you know, how can you block this? How can you stop this from happening? I'm, you know, again, a management person, a finance type person. I think it's going to be a difficult bill to enforce, but I don't think it's right that people who are in Congress can see what bills are coming up and can profit from technically not insider trading or not insider knowledge, but it's amazing how wealthy some of these people come who have never really done anything in the private sector and all that. So I would really like to see, and I think again, Bad Deal for America is strongly argues that we need to do more to have more turnover in Congress and to have more candidates and bring some new ideas to the table, not get moored in the past.
So is that the reason why America is in trouble? Because look at it. For example, we have, let's just be real. I mean, it is no disrespect, no disrespect to you, because you're obviously much older than me. I'm not even quite 50 yet. Almost there, but not quite. So the issue that we're having is that you have a lot of people in their 70s and 80s that are in office, and they've been in office for a pretty long time. We're talking about 30, 40, and 50 years. And when a younger person wants to take interest, in politics, they'd be like, nah, they just brush them away. They was like, we don't want you. And I look at it like this. In Alabama, I said, okay, I'll tell you what. Like, for example, I'm going to take the Alabama Democratic Party, for example. You know what I told them? I said, look, okay, fine. If y'all die, the party dies with it. Don't call us, don't call us, when y'all get ready to die, and say y'all need to save the party. I was like, you should have kept your mouth closed.
Well,
you should have kept your mouth closed.
I think we could have a multi-party situation in the future. I don't think the future of America is two parties. I don't think the Democrats and the Republicans are the answer to our problems moving forward.
I totally agree with that. As a matter of fact, the Libertarian Party is gaining some really high ground, especially in the 2022 election. You have a record number of libertarians that are running for office this year. In Alabama, in the governor's race, you have 2 libertarian candidates and you have 1 independent candidate. That's one. That has never happened in Alabama's, history. And we know that the Libertarian Party is not really that old. It started in 1971. So it's not. So it's a little bit over 50 years old compared to Republican Party or the Democratic Party. They've been in for nearly 200 years.
It is interesting. I think that we could end up with as many as 5 leading political parties as things change. If we go, and if you look around the world, Italy, England, Israel, all different countries around the world have multi-party systems, and it forces compromise. It forces people to look at other viewpoints. And so I do think that it's very possible here in the United States that we could forge a multi-party system. But I think you're going to have term limits ahead of that. And then once there's a bigger mix and you get out of that, I did want to make an observation based on your age statement. You realize that Joe Biden has been in Washington as long as you are old. And
I, be-
think about that.
I believe that I looked at the CBS coverage of campaign 1974. That was the year I was born, and uh, Joe Biden was, elected to another term. I think in the Senate, I believe. In the Senate, and that was before. So he represent Michigan, in the Senate before President Nixon resigned, and he became. Spiro Agnew, resigned, and
right.
Nixon appointed him to be vice president. And then when Nixon resigned, he became president. But originally, no, that's Gerald Ford. I'm sorry.
Gerald Ford. I was going to say
that's Gerald Ford was Michigan.
Gerald Ford
but
was
Biden,
Michigan, yes.
Biden has. But you're right. Biden has been, in the Senate since the 60s, and he represented state of Delaware. So he's from Delaware. He's from Delaware. So he's been there, for quite a while before he was actually elected vice president in 2008.
Yes. Yeah, it's just amazing. In my book, Bad Deal for America, by the way, the header on each politician that we list says how long they were in Washington or are presently in Washington. We do have a couple people in there who are no longer in office. We have a couple people who are deceased. And you might say, well, why did we pick them? We picked them because they said such outrageously stupid things that it added to the humor of the book. The book is intended to be, even though it's a very serious message, it's basically political satire, but accomplished through the lens of actual real statements by people that we have elected. And I mean, it's not a chump change job. I mean, these people make, the base salary is $174,000 a year, and not very many Americans make $174,000 a year. And then they have all these perks and bennies and under the table stuff that essentially means that they make a great deal more money than 174,000. And it drives me crazy when they come out and say, oh, we're really underpaid. We're really wonderful public servants. And if you're underpaid and you're really a wonderful public servant, why don't you do your 3 terms or something like that, or 2 terms, and go back home and make more money if you think you can do that, and show the rest of us how it's done, and communicate with the rest of us. So I'm not I'm one of the people that's not buying the poor stories. And in fact, I'd like to set up a dormitory system in Washington, D.C. I'd like to ship all of these people and say, your deal is you function out of your home district. No more of this stuff camping out in Washington and having a big house in McLean, Virginia. Or I want you folks to really be grounded. When you go to Washington for votes or for committee meetings, you can stay in a government-run dormitory, and we'll give you a dormitory room. Not complicated.
Right. I'm gonna give you a perfect.
That's what we do when we go to college, right?
Right. And I'll give you a perfect example with that. So we have a guy who in Alabama who's running in Congressional District 4. His name is Robert Alderhall, but he actually lives in Alexandria, Virginia. Well, Keith, how do you know that? Because I lived in Virginia for about 17 years, starting from the late 90s to about 2016. And he actually ran for office in Northern Virginia on several occasions since that 17-year tenure that I've been down there. That's how I know. And so when the conversation came back up again, saying that Alderhall don't even live in Alabama. He lives in Alexandria, Virginia. His wife is there. His kids go to school in Alexandria. And I was like, oh my goodness. I say, and that's when it clicked in my, head. I said, I remember him when I was in Northern Virginia, and that he ran for office on several occasions. Doctor, when I say that these folks in Congressional District 4 in Alabama are blind, Ray Charles could actually see through that mess. But they don't care. But they don't care. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just a perfect example of what you've been saying. Now, my next question is that you mentioned that you see America going into a multi-party system, right? And that before that has to happen, there needs to be term limits, right?
Yes.
So my question would be that we know that within the two major parties, you have a lot of special interests, you have a lot of corporate interests, you have a lot of money that's floating in both of these parties. Do you actually believe that they will push for term limits? Let alone, say, we got a third major party that is a major, competitor. And I'm gonna give an example. In 1968, you had a three-man race for the presidency,
Yes, we
and
sure did.
you had a three-man race for the presidency. But the candidate that really stood, the candidate that really made the election exciting, in my opinion, is former Alabama Governor George Wallace. He really made, the race competitive, to the point that, it took the next day to really decide who had won, the presidency. And, Richard Nixon, barely, got out, alive,
Oh, yeah.
to where in 1992 was a different story, where you had Ross Perot, that was running, as an independent. Um, but it wasn't as much friction as it was
Well,
in 1968.
Ross Perot, yeah, the 68 election was definitely more entertaining. And in fact, a bit of memorabilia that I have from 1968 is I have a full color poster of Hubert H. Humphrey for, like a campaign poster, but I mean, like a full-size poster. It's hilarious. So I've got it stored somewhere. I'm planning to probably put it up on eBay someday. And
It's
but
probably going to worth a lot of money, I'm sure.
I can use it, but it is pretty interesting. But yeah, Ross Perot just having a third party candidate changed the outcome of the 92 election, and also not as much, but did have an influence on the 96 election. But one of the challenges we have is that we're still picking from less than optimal candidates. So I think in addition to moving towards term limits, and most likely at some point a multi-party system, I think we're going to have to change things. Now, one of the things I talk about very briefly in the book, because I'm not an expert on this, is there's something called the Convention of States. And this is something that citizens can do to change the Washington, but it has to be done on a state-by-state basis. And there's the proposal that is out there is to have a convention of states just on the term limits issue to try and return the government to control of the people. And I don't know where that is at the moment, but that's the one thing that I've heard. I don't expect the people in Washington to vote for term limits. And that's the problem. So I think absent a convention of states or some massive turnover where things really change a lot, I don't know I don't know how we're going to get to term limits without a convention of states, is short version.
Is that something that is that something that citizens can do? Like they can, like present a proposal, and it goes to the legislator, and if the legislator votes on it, then it goes to a vote of the people.
It's I'm not an expert on it, but it's similar to that. I will tell you that toward the end of my book, Bad Deal for America, I do have a link to the Convention of States and it gives you some more information as to how that works. And supposedly there are enough states that have interested populations that they could probably put something together, in the near future. But I'm not tracking it because I'm tracking too much other stuff, if you know what I mean. But the idea being that even though many people are elected to Congress today, and people will say to the politician, hey, if you get to Washington, do you agree to limit your terms? Many of those people will say, absolutely. One of my campaign planks is to limit, time in Washington and all that. And then they get there and they don't do it. So I think we're going to have to actually do something more forceful.
You said the convention.
Yeah, it's called Convention of States.
Convention of States. So moving right along here, you have two. So you host two podcasts. One is called Saving America, and the other one is Business Law 101.
Yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Saving America is a very eclectic presentation. It's kind of the crossover between business and politics. And we interview a lot of authors, and we talk to a lot of people who are in the public eye for various reasons. And we talk to a lot of smart people and some people who are very interesting. And our format for our regular Saving America is 3 questions, and we shoot to have a 10-minute segment. And in that 10-minute segment, I do an introduction of the person, give you some reason as to why this person got interviewed, and then ask them 3 key questions. And that's it. It's a very, very simple format. We've moved on to also adding some panel discussions. Like we did a panel discussion recently with a retired FBI agent who's also an attorney and an attorney professor like myself. And we talked about fraud on the social media. Of course, that's been brought to the forefront with the Twitter purchase by Elon Musk and his criticism that a lot of the numbers behind Twitter are bogus. And we talked about in our panel discussion about the fact that many of us are being solicited on social media by people who are not real. And so it's really something else. And then Business Law 101 was actually a creation of Rachel Harrison, who's my VP of operations and runs our consulting practice. And Rachel is a very interesting approach. And we had recorded my business law class over a period of time. And then when I was teaching on Zoom, we made copies of my Zoom lectures. And so Rachel is taking pieces of things that I'd created and releasing them in very short segments, about 3-minute segments. And each one of those segments talks about a specific area of contract law or business law, or why you should have a will, or what are the different ways that you can own real estate. So it's pretty eclectic. I don't know what my statistics are for Saving America. I know we're starting to pick up more viewers, but for Business Law 101, we just hit 17,000 views on YouTube, which is all of our podcasts, webcasts are up on YouTube, and also on Anchor. Anchor is audio only, and YouTube, of course, is audio and video. So it's a lot of work, and as if I didn't have enough to do, we just started a new series called Starstruck, which I talk about different arts events, and I review plays and things like that. So we've actually expanded to 3 webcasts now, and so I don't know that we'll do as many arts pieces. We do from 1 to 3 Saving America segments every week, and we release usually 1 or 2 business law segments every week.
So ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that Dr. Schein was talking about was the Convention of States. And so I'm going to give the audience an overview of what that is. Article 5 of the US Constitution gives states the power to call a convention of states to propose amendments. It takes 34 states to call the convention and 38 states to ratify any amendments that's being proposed. So this never before used process proposed by the Constitution, which allows states to have the power to propose amendments. Again, it takes about 2/3 of the country, which is about 34 states, to call the convention, and it takes 38 states to ratify any proposed amendment.
Fascinating stuff, isn't it?
Last time that this has happened was in 2015. An organization called Citizens for Self-Government launched a nationwide effort to require Congress to call an Article 5 convention through a project called Convention of States in a bid to rein in the federal government or to have some type of power. There has, to bring some power back to the people. As of March of this year, the Citizens for Self-Government resolution has passed in 19 states. So how many states there are part of the Convention of States? There are 34 out of 50 states would need to apply in order for Congress to call a constitutional convention. The Article 5 convention is a way for states to bypass Congress, because they're saying, okay, in order for you to do this, you got to get permission from Congress. But Article 5 of the Constitution provides us to bypass Congress. When 2/3 of the state legislators apply for the convention, which means that in order for a state to apply or call for a convention, 2/3 of the state legislator had to vote in favor of it. So if you have a 2/3 majority in the state house to ratify it, then they will become part of the conventions of states. And so you have to have 34 state legislators out of 50, that's 2/3, in order to have in order for Congress to call a constitutional convention. So that is what a convention of states, that's what that means. And in this, citizens can also, they can propose and draft these amendments and advocate to their state legislators to file, to have it on the floor. Of course, it still has to go through the necessary protocols. It has to go through committee, it has to come out of committee, the appropriate committee. And then if that committee votes for it, then it goes before the entire body. Some are called senators, some called the Senate, some called the House of Representatives. They're different names. There are different names that vary per state. But that is the process. So if we want to have a conversation about having term limits, then this can actually be a grassroots movement, a campaign, to where we actually rally and advocate to our state legislators to propose term limits. Of course, in certain states, it's going to be more difficult than others to do so. But let's see how many states had joined the Convention of States campaign. So far we have 16 states. We have 16 out of 34 states. That's nearly half of what is needed. And this is as of January 25th, 2022. And those states are Georgia, Alaska, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Indiana, Oklahoma, Alabama, Tennessee, Indiana, Louisiana, Arizona, North Dakota, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Utah, Mississippi, and Wisconsin. So right now, as of January 25th, 2022, those are the 16 states. We're near the halfway mark. So we basically need 18 more states to come on board, and that would automatically trigger Article 5 of the Constitution.
Well, it could be a lot of fun, but like I said, I think I have a good feeling about that. I think we're going to have some changes here, and I know a lot of people are concerned about what's happening in the world, and I can see people maybe have come out of a period of apathy and are starting to appreciate the need to pay more attention to both local and federal politics. So we'll see. You mentioned in the election in Alabama that only 20% of the electorate turned out, and you know, in some other countries, turnout is much higher than it is in the United States. So I think it indicates that over the past, we've become very complacent about our government, and the answer is I think we can no longer allow we can't be complacent about it. We've got to get in there and participate as much as we can. And so
why do you think people are being apathetic about elections in general? One of the things that I hear is, well, two things that I hear. One of the things that I hear is that my vote doesn't count. And number two, I get people saying, well, no matter who we put in office, they're not going to do what they said they're going to do. Those are the two things that I hear.
Well, I think both of them are excuses, but I would say just simply that the quality of life in America is generally good. Most of us, while there is food insecurity, there are housing problems, there are definitely problems in our society, in our home lives. Overall, we're better off than most of the rest of the world. I mean, there might be some countries that enjoy a higher standard of living and fewer poor people. You know, Switzerland comes to mind, place like that. But in
Norway, Finland.
Yeah, in terms of a diverse, large country, it's not bad here. I mean, you know, if you work hard, you get some skills or get an education, there's some reasonable opportunities. So I think if people felt that ultimately their standard of living was going to deteriorate, they'd be more motivated. And I think one of the things that I've heard that kind of comes to mind is various economic projections saying that the new children's generation, the post-2000 babies, may not have it better than we had. And kind of America has had kind of a progression where each generation has done better than the one before, has accomplished more, has earned more, has achieved a higher standard of living compared to, you know, what has been invented or whatever. And there's a concern that this latest generation may not indeed have as good a lifestyle and as much accomplishment as the previous generations. It might be the first time that instead of this, there's a dip downward, and that maybe people will wake up and say, gee, that wasn't such a good deal. Why did we do that? What made that happen? And maybe people will get more motivated, but certainly a 20% turnout for an election is not working. It's not getting people's attention.
So the question would be, what is going to get people's attention? What is going to bring people to the poll? You know, that we know, for example, and I hate to be partisan here, but uh, this is kind of like where we're at right now in terms of elections. On the Republican side, there seems to be a lot of fear mongering tactics. That's going on. That's bringing a lot of people, in. For example, they would say, well, we need to secure our elections, and we need to secure, our voters, secure our borders. So that's what's bringing some of them out. And then you have, on the other side, that says that, you know, uh, the thing that on the other side of the coin, Democrats talking about, the reproductive justice and uh, the right for women to have an abortion was, taken away from it. And that's what drawing them, to the polls. But if we can just step away from political parties for a little bit, what is going to draw everybody from the polls to say, okay, this is not a Democratic thing, this is not a Republican thing, this is an issue, this is an issue that we're all dealing with.
Absolutely. And I don't have a ready answer for you, but like I said, I think if people perceive their standard of living declining, if people continue to feel unsafe, if people continue to feel that their politicians in Washington are up there to pad their own pockets and not to take care of the people in their districts, maybe something will happen. And I think we did have, rather surprising to me, I think the turnout for the presidential election is only 60%. And so hopefully we're going to have a much more involved populace in the future, and people need to connect their lifestyle and their wallet and their children's future to who they're voting for, and maybe get a little bit more motivated. I mean, a lot of parents, and speaking as a grandparent, I put money aside for my grandchildren's college educations and stuff like that. We want our children and our children's children to have a better life. And when the perception becomes more accepted and more common that that's not going to happen, they're not going to have a better life, it may motivate people to be more involved in the community and more involved in politics. That's my hopeful guess.
Do you believe now? We know that we know that the history of America has not been very good. There's been some very dark moments in
Yeah.
American history, and that should be taught. Even elections got really, and those dark moments has spilled into a lot of the elections. For example, the election of 1860. Where you have the North, was doing everything they could to preserve the Union, and then in the South, you had, an issue where they call it state rights. That they believe that states should be have an autonomous self-government, but that wasn't really what's about. It was really the fact that they wanted to maintain their immoral, inhumane way of life, but they dressed it up and put it in a political package, kind of like what happened in 2016. When, and I never heard this term before, before 2016, alternative fact. I'm like, what is that? Okay. So those dark moments in American history has spilled over, even, into our electoral system. It has become a partisan thing, and now they're saying, well, no, we don't want y'all kids. We don't want your kids, to learn anything about that. We want kids, to learn that America was a happy place, a joyous place. And everybody got along, do that day, kumbaya, but that's a lie. Why would you want to teach your kids a lie? And you know, and I think that if we learn from our past, whether it's economically, you know, or politically, don't you think that we would make better decisions, you know, as politicians, as citizens, if we know what went on in the past? I mean, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, hey, let's face it, American history was not all bed and roses. There
Right.
was some very dark moments.
Yeah.
And some of these dark moments have really, you know, have really, you know, it done some damage to this country.
Yeah. Well, it's and it's interesting because it's also, political. A lot of people don't realize that Lyndon Johnson was an overt racist, and yet he is oftentimes, referenced as the person who, of course, because of Kennedy's assassination. By the way, Kennedy actually put the Civil Rights Act together. Lyndon Johnson, when Kennedy was assassinated, inherited it from him, but he's the person, kind of the poster child for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But despite the fact that Lyndon Johnson was a well-established racist and clearly a very anti-Martin Luther King, by the way, he was so desperate to be reelected president in 1964 that he put all of his time, all of his energy and political capital into making that happen. And what a lot of people don't realize is that his primary opponent were Southern Democrat politicians. And
Dixiecrat.
yeah, the Dixiecrats. And of course, you mentioned George Wallace earlier, who of course was a governor and not a senator, but he was out there pushing those Democrat senators, and the Republican Party was largely solidly in his camp. So he had to convince Democrats to help him get over, because the Republican vote was not enough to get him over. But it's kind of interesting as people see things in a different light. One of the reasons I wrote Decline of America was that in this country we have an unusual adoration for Franklin Roosevelt. If you've ever been to the new part of the Washington Monument area, they've built a 2-block memorial to Franklin Roosevelt, who, in my opinion, did a great deal of damage to this country. Another racist, by the way, which a lot of Democrats don't seem to want to own up to today. And, the military, United States military, fought World War II with a segregated military. In what universe does that make sense? Harry Truman desegregated the military, not Franklin Roosevelt, our big hero, with our big 2-block monument to him. And Roosevelt put Stalin on the same level as him and Winston Churchill during the middle of World War II. And that was a grievous error. And what people don't seem to realize, again, because people don't know history very well, is Stalin murdered more people than Hitler. Stalin it created purges, and millions of people died under Stalin's administration over Eastern Europe and Russia. And Franklin Roosevelt was the guy in charge who said, yeah, you can have that part, we'll keep the rest of it. First of all, those countries weren't Roosevelt's to give away. And of course, now we see, the remnants of this with the Ukraine war that's going on right now is it should never, ever have been part of Russia. And, it was an independent country. It should never, but, Roosevelt's sloppiness in the later parts of World War II just really weren't very good. So I agree with you. I think we need to have a more fair depiction of what's happening out there. And a lot of it is because we hear what the press and what certain academics want us to know. We don't hear the real gritty story, A to Z. And my grandparents' generation and your grandparents' generation are largely blamed for it. I mean, the grandparents came on and said, "Ooh, you know, Franklin Roosevelt fixed the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt won World War II, and he's a hero. He's a wonderful person." And it's like, you know, if you really get down to it, a lot of bad things have happened since he died in 1945 that didn't have to happen if he had made better decisions, including not running for office after 2 terms. We needed to pass a law to prevent other people from getting such big egos that they thought they had to be reelected.
Right.
But
So that's what's it, the 25th Amendment, came about because he's the only president that's been
I think
elected 4 times.
yeah, but yeah, 25th is on mental ability, and of course they threatened to use that against Trump, and there's a possibility they may need to use that on Biden. I'm sure you heard about the gaffe heard around the world where he looked for a congresswoman who died in a car accident a month earlier. And he was looking for her. He's calling out her name. You know, where is she? Where is she? So I don't know how much longer that's going to be, but it's tough out there. And I don't, you know, my commitment in my classroom is to try and be as nonpartisan as possible. But I can tell you that I know from, you know, my own classes in earlier days and to you know, what I hear from other students and faculty is that a lot of stuff is fairly partisan in the classroom. I did want to throw in one pitch that I think is important. We have political election of judges here in Texas, and in many situations we have political judges, and of course the U.S. Supreme Court came under a lot of scrutiny this year because of the Trump appointments and the perception that it's a 6-3 Republican majority. And I'm concerned that we try, at least starting with the judicial system, to depoliticize the judicial system. I don't think justice should be a Republican or a Democratic issue. I think justice should be blind, as the famous statue of Lady Justice with her, you know, blindfold over her eyes, holding the scales of justice. And I think it's important that we come up with a better way of getting people onto the judicial seats. And I mean, and to me, that's complete from the Supreme Court down to the traffic court judges. That I don't know why we care if someone's a Democrat or a politician, or a Republican politician who sits on a bench. I think that person ought to be responsible to the people and not to any particular political party. So
I definitely agree with that. And we can also, add some members of law enforcement, like your state attorney general,
yeah,
your county sheriff.
yeah.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that they should be. I don't think that they should have a party attached to them. Also,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot that we could do. And I think it would improve the connection between the police and the judiciary and the people. I think it would help a great deal to take the politics out of as much as possible of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and certainly our judicial system and our, as you mentioned, our county sheriffs, county constables. They are politically elected, but I don't think it's a good idea.
we're going to get ready to wrap up here. But if you wanted to know more about the Convention of States, you can go to www.conventionofstates.com. There you would get the whole lowdown of what it is and how you can get involved. If this is something that you want to get involved with. That's conventionofstates.com. And my final question to you is that how can someone be able to reach you if they want to contact you?
Well, first of all, both books are available on Amazon. If you just go up on Amazon and you look up either book, you'll get to me very quickly. I have a central website. It's World Wide Web, ClaremontManagementGroup.com. And a lot of my activities are under that. Also, as we mentioned, that my webcasts are available on YouTube and Anchor. And I very much appreciate being invited today. This is one of the longest interviews I've had an opportunity to do, and it's been a lot of fun. And thank you so much. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you so much. And we here at the Australia broadcast section, we understand as a podcast is a form of media. And we believe firmly, that media should never be biased. We don't believe in being biased. We don't believe in being partisan. We are here for the purpose of informing the people, engaging the people, controlling the narrative, and allow people to tell their truth, their story. And we often talk about things that the mainstream media really doesn't, talk about, like the conversation that we have, right now. When the last time that you seen or heard anything on the news related to what we're talking about? Not much.
No, not much, because it doesn't serve their particular interest, and they probably lose a lot of advertising that came out and said that they didn't want to have a lot of partisan stuff going on.
But we work a little different here.
And it's much appreciated.
Okay, we're going to close out here. We want to remind you that on October 3rd to the 5th, we will be covering two cases that have gone to the Supreme Court, one from state of Alabama and one for North Carolina. The one in North Carolina has to do with election integrity, and the one in Alabama has to do with a controversy of the congressional lines that was drawn in 2021. And those cases will be heard by the Supreme Court on October the 4th. And so we will have 3 days of coverage on that. We will break it down. We will break two of the cases down. We will also have some highlights of those cases. And we also will, there's also going to be a march and a rally and a press conference as well. And we're going to cover all of that. So it's going to be a busy 3 days. We hope that you will, it's going to be live on YouTube. So we hope that you'll be able to join our YouTube channel. Just look up OBS International on YouTube, and you'll be able to follow our live coverage. The preview will actually be taped. That would be taped on October the 3rd. So, and we will have that posted on Facebook, YouTube, Anchor, all your favorite podcast platforms. So be on the lookout for that. So it's our ongoing coverage of the 2022 election. We thank you so much, Dr. Schein, for being a part of this podcast interview. Wish you great success in your future endeavors. And if you ever feel like you want to come back, because we do time to time get repeat. Sometimes we have interviews with, multiple interviews with the same person. That's not uncommon.
Well, that'll be fine. And again, I've enjoyed being here, and I am working on some new projects. And so maybe we'll get a chance to come back and talk about some new stuff.
That's fantastic. And I bid you good evening. Farewell for now, and we will be back. So until then, this is Keith Williams, your host for Talk Show Presents. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.